Okay, we are live. Episode 19 is the second iteration of Kris Painschab from Badlands Herpetoculture. The goal this time being to actually talk about Coleonyx like we wanted to last time and not go into giant tangents, which I had people message me about for several days afterward. No, actually, I thought that was super cool. I much prefer to have those kind of conversations with people, and I don't know. I liked it. I just recently had the same thing with the Scott and Ty Iper. I had Teresa on. We talked to them for quite a long time, and like I almost forgot to talk about their book. And Teresa, after we were done, Teresa was like, "Hey, isn't that why you asked them to come on?" And I was like, "Yeah, but they were cool, so we just talked." And so that's what happened. And I had a bunch of people message me after you and I talked the first time. And they were like, "Yeah, you should totally get him on again and talk about Coleonyx like you guys mentioned." And I was like, "Yeah, that was the plan. It just didn't happen." So
yeah.
And then of course I named it Coleonyx and Kids. I had several folks ask about the fact that you include your daughter in your hobby, because I also include my kids. And we touched on it a little bit last time, but I had a lot of folks that were very interested in that. And I constantly get comments about including my kids and whether or not people include their kids or how to get them into it and so on and so forth. So I definitely knew you were a good person to talk to about that, because I've seen your posts and stuff from your daughter. And like I said, when I made the Facebook post for folks who are just listening to the podcast, you'll also see it in the little thumbnail. I was fortunate enough to receive some snakes from Kris, and he actually sent me a picture of his daughter watering the snake. And I commented like, "Yeah, that's good customer service." So that's pretty cool. But yeah, man. So you sent me some pictures on Messenger of different Coleonyx setups and things. And I've heard you talk in the past that you do a multitude of ways in how you keep things, and you have some in some different places. So just kind of take some folks through it and let us know what you're doing.
Yeah. I made a little outline for the genus to kind of like start with.
Awesome.
So Coleonyx fit, and by any means, anybody listening to this, I am not a biologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm a hobbyist at best. And my information comes from either experience or reading other people's words. I was not the one that did the research. Trial and error may be considered research, but and maybe it is. But that's about as far as I've delved into the true scientific nature of this stuff.
All right, wait. Let me pause you so that everyone who listens to this and the people that we have live, I would like to point out that anyone worth listening to, in my experience in herpetoculture, always starts their sentences that way, and they always say, "Well, I'm not an expert," and then when they talk, they're an expert. In herpetoculture, especially in social media, the person that walks up to you, or in Facebook virtually walks up to you and says, "I know everything about this," they don't.
No.
The person who caveats the statement with, "Yeah, I did a lot of stuff with those geckos, but I'm not an expert," they're probably pretty close. So anyway, continue, because I think that you are. So that's why I wanted to talk to you.
So yeah, they're a really interesting species, and there's a few standout things about them that makes them interesting. They are kind of like our knobtails. So knobtails are a terrestrial aggressive hunter, not necessarily an ambush predator. Excuse me. Woo. In Australia. And so it's going to be the same thing. They range all the way north up into Nevada, and they'll get all the way south past Ecuador and Honduras. I actually wrote down some ranges because I'm going to forget the names of stuff. That's the other thing. I also don't know how to say these names, but neither does any other living human being, because it is not a language that is spoken anymore. So Coleonyx fits within the group of eublephaриds, which is kind of neat. They're all geckos that have eyelids and do not have lamellae. Coleonyx kind of increased that lack of lamellae in the same sense. They don't have sticky toes, for anybody that doesn't know that term. They take one more step further. So the actual name Coleonyx comes from a Greek word, I believe it's koleos, and that is sheath and then onyx, which is claw. So they actually have sheathed claws. Some of them, like the elegans, have like a fully sheathed claw, and some, like the brevis, have just a slightly sheathed claw. So it's kind of thought that as the divergence of the northernmost species, which is going to be your variegatus, your brevis, your reticulatus, and then that slows down into a couple others, and we'll kind of knock out each one. They are evolving more to not have a sheathed claw, but that's because the terrain they're on is more rock, more sand, less leaf litter, less low-lying forest, less decaying wood, maybe, that they need to grip, and maybe that's also something that's like a cleaning system. It's never really been explored too much. And honestly, it's one of those things that they're such small animals. It may be something that's kind of hard to discern what it does. So we can also break them down into like 3 sections. You have your northernmost, which are, and I'm not going to really call them the desert variations, because it's more like arid landscape, right? We don't have any, Sahara desert dunes,
right,
in a big scale. Mostly you'll find them around rocks, rock cuts, out on trails and in arid mountainous areas. So that starts Coleonyx variegatus, which is the northernmost species, and that's going to be in Nevada, and that bleeds all the way down the Baja Peninsula, all the way over into and I wish I had like a range map I could show you, all the way over into Arizona. And there are 3 different subspecies, and I don't actually remember the names of each of those, and I should, but that was originally not 3 subspecies. Then it was broken down into 3 subspecies, and it may have actually gone back to just a single species now. Then that flows over into our brevis, which is probably one of my favorite of the species. So that's the Texas banded gecko. The variegatus being the western banded gecko. So we have our brevis. Brevis is kind of found quite a bit in western Texas, and then goes down south into the Nuevo Leon mountains, the Tamaulipan mountains, the Durango mountain ranges. And you think of brevis as like your montane kings. You're going to find them in a lot of the same places you find your montane king snakes, your Theri, your Alterna.
Right.
If you find Mex-Mex, you're going to find, anything in that group is going to share a range with brevis. It's kind of interesting. And they almost come east enough to be on the Texas coast where I'm at. They go to about Freer, Texas. In fact, if we went south down to the Laredo area, they start being found in that general landscape area. Del Rio, they're all over the place, Valverde. In that neat little pocket over in West Texas, and in 2 little spots in Mexico, there's a very special species called Coleonyx reticulatus, and that's the reticulated gecko. They're mostly found in caves and deep in rock cuts. They're almost like a transparent skinned animal, and they're the biggest variety of Coleonyx. They were recently described as far as timeline of described reptiles. I don't know the exact year, sorry. But they are really, really hard to find. In fact, I went looking specifically for reticulatus, not only reticulatus, but I was very much wanting to see a reticulatus in my most recent Western Texas trip. And I just found this super lame king snake on a rock. And it was quite amazing. But no, we didn't find any. I have spoke with a few people that have found them, and they're very uncommon. They're non-existent in the reptile trade, with the caveat that in, I believe, March 29th, 2019, I believe was the day, Texas Fish and Wildlife removed them from the endangered species list, and now you can actually collect, keep, and breed. You just cannot sell them in Texas, which is fine. You can ship them out. You can give them to people. You just cannot sell them. It cannot be a monetary trade. So my hope is to, at some point in my life, get to work with them. I do know of 1 or 2 people that have them, but usually it's onesies, right? You find a male, you might find a female, and then now you're trying to get it together. And because we're talking about Texas reptiles, we want to keep everything locality specific, down to like the rock cut. And so it's like, oh, you found that in, Black Gap at the headquarters cut. Oh man, I found this one on Black Gap, but I found this down at the the ranch cut down at the end. So pretty much different animals. So we're that's a deviation of what we're talking about. But yeah, so hopefully those animals start to get seen. They're really, really special looking. They've got this spectacular pink, purple vibe to them. They look like aliens. They look like a gecko that was turned into a vampire and then like quadrupled in size compared to the brevis, the Texas geckos.
So is the thought process there that I don't know how to verbalize that the rarity is more based on how and where they live as opposed to rarity in numbers, and so that maybe that's why they're no longer endangered? Or
I believe that's exactly it. It's not that they're actually endangered, it's that they're impossible to find.
Okay.
These cracks, these fissures in the mountains when you're going through our notorious rock cuts while you're driving through West Texas, they have these fissures. Those fissures could go hundreds of yards into the mountain, right? We have no idea. That's where Alterna are. That's where your cuculata are. That's where a lot of these crevice dwelling species that don't come out until nighttime. That's where they reside. And the thought is that's where these geckos are found. That's what these guys are preying on, is brevis, these guys, Texas spiny lizards, the little neat earless lizards they have over there. So yeah, also they're quite cave dwellers. So they have that. Animals that live and have evolved and adapted to live in caves have you look at these and you say, oh, I get it. Right. They have that opaqueness to them. It's almost like it's washed out. Like color wasn't a necessity anymore. Now they just have to have enough light absorbing pigment or coloration in their body that other animals of their own type can find them, or you know what I mean. There's a lot of thoughts on how that works. Oh, my computer just. Excuse me a second. I'm sorry, Bill.
Nope.
Okay.
You're good.
Sorry, my computer just started making a ton of noises, and I was like, "What's that?" So yeah, a super interesting species. Not one that I know a ton about, but we'll go ahead and say that. So that draws out our arid line. In the arid line of geckos down on the Baja Peninsula, there's two others: the Swataki, Coleonyx swataki, which is the barefoot gecko, and that's found mostly on the east coast of the Baja Peninsula. And then we have the I wrote it down because I can't say it, Gypsicolonus, which is the Isla San Martin island Coleonyx barefoot gecko. They're only on one island. Right. Again, that's a protected species that we're not going to ever see in the hobby. Hopefully not. They are actually extremely rare and endangered. They don't need to be. They need to be worked with, but the people that need to work with them don't need to be the people that are out plucking them and selling them for $500. Right. It needs to be a zoo group, a zoo side group would be the right place for something like that to be found. The Swataki are in the hobby, but are very uncommon. As of now, I only know one person that has worked with them or does work with them, at least in America. A lot of this stuff went overseas too. So like, when we find a Texas banded gecko, we're not like, or maybe not even find, just see one at a reptile show or something. It's not like, it's not a high monetary value animal. So sure. It kind of gets overlooked. And I'm going to hit that, a good point on that.
It's our version of a knobtail, but it doesn't cost knobtail money because we have them.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And there's something really interesting I want to delve into on that, and we'll hop on that after we look at the last two species on the list. So now we're going to go down through Mexico into Central America, and we're going to start hitting what is the Honduras, El Salvador? Mm-hmm. That's down at the bottom, but above that you have the Yucatan Peninsula and all of that Yucatan Basin area. So that's where you're going to find Coleonyx elegans. So the elegans are a little bit more worked with, but these are going to start being your bottom forest dweller species. So the elegans and the mitratus, when we get to care, I'm going to say these are how I handle these, and then we're going to have our desert species. That's going to be a different and again, not desert, I need to be saying arid, I'm sorry. Our arid species will kind of hit that on a different wavelength. Right. So the elegans is the northern version, and then you go south, which is going to be more El Salvador, Honduras, and that's going to be the Coleonyx mitratus. Out of all of these species, with the exception of the reticulatus and the San Marcos Island geckos, mitratus actually has the smallest range, but is the most prevalent in the hobby. And it's because of the way that country and area handles exportation of wild-caught animals. Right. There's a lot more out there. A gentleman goes out in the forest and plucks these things off the floor because they're extremely prevalent, and sells them for $5-10 a piece to a importer. They come in, they sell them at the reptile show for $30 to $50 a piece, and 90%, if not more, probably die. Improper care, improper husbandry, or it's a cheap animal. So it's the thing that mom says is okay for you to buy, even though she knows after a week you're not going to worry about it. Right. So elegans, again, are a little bit more north of them, a little bit more humid of an environment, a little bit cooler environment. But again, still leaf litter, forest dwelling, and it's that bottom level forest dweller. So yeah, those are going to, there are other, I believe there's a couple other species now recognized, but they're going to be kind of those few and far in between that I'm not, and again, I'm not the best on. In fact, if anybody wants to read a lot about these species, I highly suggest you look for a copy of the eyelash geckos, which is probably one of the best books ever. This book has all of the eublephaриds highlighted, has a bunch of great information on Goneirosaurus, eublepharis, anything. All of these things are highlighted in there. And I've had this book for, it's got to be 20 years. It's a very old book, and it's very hard to find. And it's probably one of these, reptile books have gotten ridiculously expensive. I hope that this one isn't super expensive. I haven't gone out to buy it in a long time. But it's a great source for information if people want to see more of maps and learn a little bit more about individual species. Awesome. So any questions on that stuff?
So I'm not going to tell anybody what to do, but if you were to go online to a gigantic online retailer named after a rainforest, you might be able to hit buy now and swipe just like I am right now and buy that book.
Yeah, it's an older book, and it's got some outdated information in it, but it's
that just happened. So
nice. See,
you can find it, and it
does exist.
Expensive.
It's not crazy hurt book expensive.
Nope, because I just bought one.
Awesome, oh man. Yeah, it's awesome. You're going to notice there's a few things in there that are. This isn't a book club episode, but there's a few things that you can tell. You're like, these are outdated. But it's really, really interesting. They get into the individual care of all these animals, and they talk about, they have breeding pictures and how they did it for the first time, and they also have a list of species that they couldn't breed that people are now breeding, which is kind of neat. Okay, so let's say little Timmy is at the reptile show, and he just sees out of the corner of his eye this chocolate and gold, beautiful little gecko sitting on the table. It looks like a just absolute alien. It's got the cute little leopard gecko smile. It's smaller, and he goes and he picks it up, and it says, Central American banded gecko on it. It's a Coleonyx mitratus. This is a great place to start with these animals. They have a ton of personality. They have these little defense postures. They do push-ups. They kind of puff out their chest. They put their tail up in the air and wave it about, kind of like a scorpion, or to try and get you to grab the tail. These animals do drop their tails easily. I've found that females are a little bit more skittish and are more likely to drop their tail, but it's probably because they're used to males chasing them.
Right.
So
literally everything people think is awesome about knobtails.
Yeah.
But here.
And it's funny because I bet if you had somebody in Australia that worked with every species of knobtail and just loved them, and you showed them these neat little ground dwelling terrestrial, non-sticky toed geckos from America, they'd be like, wow, it almost looks like a velvet gecko. Yeah. And it's, we're jaded by the things we have. I come in my office and I open up a tub and I have a black pine snake sitting there pissed off at me because I wasn't feeding it exactly at that very moment. And I'm jaded by that because definitely in the wild, people aren't going to find these things. And to some extent, they're just going to be an animal that people aren't going to see. And it's in its nominate form. This isn't a morph. This isn't a, line bred for 100 years. I've got like one of mine is like an F2, right? Like it's not. So there's also a thing about these animals that people have the perception that an animal in the reptile hobby is special because of the dollar amount next to its name.
Yeah.
And
that's how it's awesome.
And that's not, that's human intuition. Sure. I am a collector of things. I have very awkwardly expensive tennis shoes that I don't need or want, but I got them because they were a limited edition Nike SB or something, and I had to have them, and now I've never worn them because now you can't wear them because they cost $300 and you can't, but you have to have them because, they're so pretty and cool or whatever. And our minds are set that way. So when we sit here and we're at the reptile show and we see this $30 to $50 gecko that sadly is probably going to be on an importer exporter table, it's not going to look very healthy. It's not going to have the robustness on its jaws that makes them so impressive. It's not going to have that thick tail, the strength in its tail. It's not going to have the cool feeling in its claws when they grab you because it's really neat. They really do just like stick into you. So we miss that by getting them from importers, exporters, finding that the shows, paying $30, $40, $50. But it does exist with that animal and with that group of animals. There are people that captive breed them. My buddy Brian Lovins, actually here in Portland, Texas, just north of me, produces a whole bunch of them. I know he regularly posts them available online. He does charge a little bit more for them than you're going to get for exporter price. But those are also guaranteed eating because these animals don't always want to eat your mealworms, right? They were in the wild chasing down, grasshoppers and probably more likely spiders. I believe that these animals eat mostly spiders. And so your dubia roaches and your PetSmart crickets might not be the guaranteed thing that a wild-caught animal is going to want to eat. But so buying captive bred from a person with a good name, and somebody that puts a lot of care into their animals, like my buddy, is going to be a good thing. And he's just one of many that does work with them. I do produce them. I do not have an adult female for my Mitratus at this time. I lost my female last year. So my group of Mitratus started with wild-caught animals in about 6 to 8 years ago, somewhere in that range. And that's kind of how I found out that with the Mitratus, you can keep them just like an absolute plethora of ways. I started kind of typical 10-gallon heat source on one side. So what you're going to shoot for with these guys is a relative humidity in that kind of like 50 to 70%. It doesn't need to be extremely high. In fact, you never want to see mold, such a common thing that people don't realize. And then they don't need a ton of light. Oh yeah, look, see, there you go. Lovin's Reptiles on Facebook, Morph Market. So the light source, there is some speculation on whether these animals need or don't need UV, and that's not the conversation right now about what needs it and what doesn't. But there is some nominate amount of UV that all arid dwelling and forest dwelling animals get, right? A little bit comes through the canopy cover, a little bit gets into those cracks. So if we can find a safe way to give it to them in our hobby, why not try? I'm not saying it's absolutely necessary, and I promise you it's not, because these tubs right here at one point had a group of a male and 2 female Coleonyx Mitratus with an 82-degree hotspot on the back, 81-degree hotspot on the back, 80-degree hotspot on the back in some instances. and I produced them for like 2 years straight, no problems. And I used a normal dirt bottom. I add springtails to just about anything that has dirt that I mess with. Has springtails. You can use pick your favorite dirt. You've got your cocoa husk systems. Gosh, I'm not even going to start naming. Everybody here that does terrariums knows there's safe and effective mulches. There's great bedding options. Kind of didn't think of a good way to say this, but I do think that bedding is important with these guys. They burrow down their legs under the dirt. It's kind of interesting with the Mitrotis. And we'll get into a neat happenstance that happened with me this winter. But they're insectivores, strictly insectivores. You're not going to get them to eat anything else. I've tried a bunch of different things. I've even tried that Rapashi. It's like a grub
pie.
Grub pie. I've tried grub pie because sometimes I'll get my guards to eat it, and anything you can do to vary a diet is going to be good. These guys won't even, like, you kind of put it on their face, they'll start licking it and they just freak out. You don't try it. But yeah, so with my Coleonyx, I also found that you do want to supplement their food items. The best way to feed an insectivore is to have prepared your insects correctly, not necessarily adding supplements on your insects, but having well-dieted generations of insects. And you can do that by buying your own or finding a source where you can purchase from somebody that is properly raising their bugs. Or once you get your bugs, have a quarantine period, 2, 3, 4 weeks, where you're, people say gut loading, but where you're getting proper nutrition into their system, because whatever you're giving them is the same. That is now what they're made of, and that's what you're feeding to your lizards.
For sure.
I used a lot of vitamin calcium supplements with my Coleonyx, and I found out after a couple years, about my second year of breeding them, if you dust too much, you put too much calcium into them, their eggs are too hard and they actually won't hatch. They are a soft shell species, which is kind of interesting for being a smaller gecko. Not every smaller gecko has a soft shell. Most of the eublephaриds do, though. Your cave geckos and stuff do. Let's think. So size of enclosure and again, so anything I'm saying for Mitrotis can be mirrored for elegans. I have not had the chance to have elegans yet, but it is on my plans this year, actually. Sorry, I don't often talk this much. Their habitats intertwine, right? As far as I know, they don't integrate. The elegans are a little bit smaller than the Mitrotis, and that's probably why they're separate species and not subspecies of each other. Actually, at one time, there was a subspecies of elegans. So it was elegans, and elegans Myrcolis. I don't remember, but there was a subspecies in the elegans family. Anyway, so we're doing like a standard forest dwelling animal setup. Think about a terrestrial crested gecko where you're trying to heat up one side of the enclosure to about 80, 82. I've like I said, I've done it in racks, and then I did eventually morph into a full bioactive setup with these guys. Not through what I would call necessity for them, but because they're one of the species that handles it really well. Coleonyx and most eublepharids poop in the same spot, so cleaning out your bioactive terrarium isn't that bad. They literally make a bathroom and you leave a couple pieces of poop there, and they always poop in the same spot. And then you get a group of them, and now you have 4 geckos in this enclosure, and they're all pooping in the same spot. It's kind of ridiculous. I believe leopard geckos do that. I did keep and breed leopard geckos a long time ago, but I've heard. But I don't think people really are keeping them in any kind of a natural. They've deprived them so far of natural care that it's almost a calculated science with them, and that's not my position to say if that's the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it. But I think with some of these other species that are pretty special, you can find a pretty fun way to still do it and not have to worry about that.
It's actually a goal of mine to keep several eubiflarids, like fat tails, leopards, Coleonyx for this side of the world, in essentially a small tortoise table. Is how it looks in my head. And because I think that style of setup allows for just this kind of rocky field look with some sand, dirt, substrate mix, and just rocks and crap scattered throughout there, is to me, like you keep saying, arid as opposed to desert. And I don't think folks realize how distinctive a difference there really is. When in the United States, when you talk about dunes, like actual sand dunes, that's a really rare habitat style in this country, and actually in this side of the planet. And it's just not how we do hot and dry here.
Yeah, right? It's weird.
Like around me in Indiana and Michigan, there are a few different parks that are like the dunes, right? It's a big deal that this park has sand dunes, and there's actually one closer to me in Illinois that's maybe 20 acres of sand dune habitat, most of which is actually sand progressing into grasses. And so it's not full traveling sand dune, as opposed to the African version of a sand dune, which would cover Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan in sand. And
literally like an eighth of the country. Yeah.
And so when we talk about arid here, even for folks that are like, the earless lizards and leopard lizards and the things that operate in these crazy hot temperatures, which are forcing geckos like Coleonyx back into those crevices due to high temperatures. Yeah. It isn't in correlation to 7 feet of sand. It's hard packed dirt and gigantic rocks that we blasted roads through, and now we look for snakes on, and we call them cuts. And so I think that it just lends itself. Like, I think it could be a really cool way to set things up of when you're doing more naturalistic enclosures, and then to see that progression to dry forest where you can keep plants and a little bit of leaf litter and things like that. It just, I don't know. In my head, like that's what I want to do, is I want to have what basically looks like a rack system, but it's pull out drawers, and it's just tortoise tables, but it's a rock field with little geckos. Like that's my goal for eubiflarids.
So two of the coolest, and we're going to get to the desert species in a little bit, and I'll talk about these enclosures. Two of the coolest enclosures I've ever seen in my life. One was an Art Deco setup, and one was just like an absolute massive community of geckos. These two setups were used for brevis. So once we get to brevis, which is like the absolute most bulletproof animal on the planet, like you can't take them out.
Even when you're talking about these forest types, like there's an easy correlation in herpetoculture. For folks, it's like if you kept a bunch of leopard geckos and then you tried fat tails, and it turns out they're not hot rock dwelling monstrosities. They need some humidity. Same. Like we're just tilt the planet a little bit and look at yours. This is that version.
I guarantee you my Trotis are easier than leopard geckos. There's no question in my mind. They are infallible. You cannot mess them up unless you get them too hot. I've kept them for months in a rack that I thought was plugged in and wasn't. No problems. They ate and bred. Nice. I've kept them too hot when I had my knobtails, and I was like, okay, well, I have this big tub. Maybe we'll just, if it's 77 degrees on one side and it's, maybe 86, 88 on the other side, let's see what they do. Yeah, they stay on the cool side, but, it is an option. It's a thing that can happen. They breed literally nonstop. So if you wanted to do a neat little breeding project, I originally bred them for feeders for snakes. I work with some king snakes that are poopy feeders, and I have some eastern black king snakes, as you know. I have snakes that don't want to eat. and
Right.
it's because we're not feeding them what they eat, right? We're trying to give them we're trying to give Snuzzy Bumpkins frozen thawed mouse from Petco. Well, it turns out Snuzzy Bumpkins lives in a rock cut 100 yards into the ground and only eats spiny-tailed lizards once a month. And so we've got to try to find ways in our hobby, if we want to kind of get into these little bit more complex animals, how to fit it. So I was going to breed my Trottis because I loved them. I had them way back in the day. So I'm going to breed them for feeders. And like the first couple babies start coming out, and I'm like, not only they're perfect size, they move a whole bunch. And I reach in to touch this animal. It's the first time I bred them. I reached in to touch this animal, and the babies squeak. They actually sound like squeaky toys. And I should have sent you the video. I have videos of it. It is the most beautiful, just heartwarming, like squeak. And it's like, no, you don't make that noise. There's absolutely no way that's coming out of you. And it's so loud. And it's out of this tiny little animal, maybe 1.5 inches long, right? And every time you go to like get closer to it, it gets all defensive and it puffs up and it sticks its little tail in the air and it goes squee. And so, it pretty much says Pikachu and then looks at you with those batting eyes. And you're like, oh, now I've got to keep all of them. And so I have had some pass. They don't all eat. They are kind of small as babies. And you're looking for small pinhead crickets, tiny dubia. Some people on the elegans, they're a little bit smaller. They start with flightless fruit flies, which is a great option because they're readily available. But so the second I realized they squeaked, I couldn't feed them to any snakes. So I had to figure something out. It's one of those things. It's the best thing you could do for, and I'm going to talk about another species, a Leachianus, right? I work with and breed Leachianus. Breed crested geckos and feed the babies to the moms, right?
Yep.
Take your baby crested geckos and feed them to the female leachies. Nothing is going to help them recuperate after laying eggs more than a baby crested gecko. Things that they actually naturally prey on in the wild. Also, I believe there's a few other species, the Urodactyloides and stuff like that. But so you've got crested geckos breeding, you throw them in there. We could never do that, right? You get a little baby crested gecko and it's got those derpy eyes and its little cute tail and it's, a flame Dalmatian lily stripe white, picket. And it's, now I just have crested geckos more, right? Like what do you, so it's tough. That's a whole side thing with this, but the Mitratus, the elegans are notorious for being these just beautiful little squeakers when they're born. I set the babies up like I said the adults. I guarantee you could breed Mitratus in a plastic bin with a piece of PVC pipe, paper towels, a humid hide, and mealworms in a water bowl, and you missed it every once in a while. I also know for a fact, and is there a way you could put that picture up of the enclosure that I have? So this is how I kind of
question.
I don't know if that's a thing.
I will try.
So I migrated into keeping these guys particularly in a bioactive setup. I don't do isopods because they will eat the isopods, and also isopods seemed really expensive. But they, I put springtails in the soil. I miss often. I have live plants. I got water bowl. I have a cool side, warm side. So one thing I've definitely found works great with the Coleonyx, specifically the Mitratus, is if they have a hot time of day, they need a cool time of day. And that doesn't always get realized in a lot of species. I have my lights on timers. I have a full spectrum UVB bulb on them. It is too strong of a bulb for these animals to have on them directly all the time. But I have a ton of leaf coverage and hiding areas to where the animal never actually has to be in contact with UV light unless it absolutely wanted to, which I've actually seen them out kind of laying. I don't know if basking is the right term, but I have seen them out during the day. They're very, very, very active animals. And then I keep my hot side. Now I have a bigger enclosure. I think it's a 30-gallon. I don't know gallons. But I keep one side at about 84 degrees. And that's going to be at the uppermost top closest to the light. I'd say down on the bottom floor it's probably about 80. And then on the left side, it's whatever ambient temperature is. We keep our office like 74 degrees, 72 degrees. Now, at night, everything turns off. However cold that office gets, if it's 60 degrees, that's what it gets. Never had a problem. I think these animals are used to being in areas where it gets cold at night. It's not 80 degrees all the time in the Yucatan Peninsula or wherever you're at. My gecko that I have in my office still, I did have a breeding group. I had actually taken some of my females and sold them to Brian Lovins. That's where his initial group, I believe, started. And then I lost my last female I had kept behind. They laid eggs in the enclosure. I used to go look for eggs. Then towards the end, I would just let the babies hatch, and I would find them, and it'd be like neat little Easter egg surprises. I'd never seen the parents prey on the babies, but I also didn't know how even much they were breeding at that time. But it was kind of cool. Like I had this little community of geckos going on, and babies would pop up, and I would take them home and set them up.
Okay, so I am going to see if this share thing works, and if it does, it should be the 3 pics you sent me. Hopefully it doesn't totally freak out. Let's find out.
All right. So yeah, that is Dwight, Coleonyx Dwight Trottis, the office gecko. He has been in my office for 5 or 6 years. I think I've had him for 7 or 8, and he was an adult wild caught when I got him. But he is probably the most chill gecko ever. He is just, I don't know, it just hangs out. He doesn't do any of his defensive postures anymore. He kind of just does his thing. But yeah, I think
look at how long that tail is.
It's big. They're way bigger than.
That is so crazy.
He's so chill. He's great. He's a great specimen, and most of them are like that. So yeah, there's there's his home. That was a tiny little pothos that grew and grew and grew and grew. You can see there's drainage layer. And then the carbon layer, I think, is the next one. I bought one of those. Full disclosure, I'm not the best at bioactive stuff. I bought one of those kits. I missed it every day that I'm there. The little dual light thing is set up on timers so that I have a bulb that keeps it about, like I said, 82, 84 max, and then a UV bulb in there. Everything else is just normal, kind of really, really easy. I have never cleaned that cage ever, literally never. So there could just be like 50 geckos in there. I don't even know about it. But
the perfect enclosure.
Yeah, it's I've cleaned the glass a couple times when I've gotten something on it, but I don't know. It's great. Everybody loves it. I'll go rooting through it to dig them out every once in a while. Show them to customers that are in my office or something. It's just great, and it's proof that it's the easiest animal on the planet to keep, right? Like you have a few parameters that you checked off on a box. You set it up in this pretty cool looking enclosure to just be in the corner of an office. Now, if somebody was more imaginative and knew more about plants other than like just get a pothos, if somebody could make this into an absolute piece of art, right? This could be a genuine piece of art in your house, in your office, at your school, and you'd have this neat community of animals. That's really, really, really easy to keep. So the freeze of Texas, Texas prevailed. It got pretty bad. Here in Corpus, we were lucky. It did freeze. It got down to about 10 degrees, which is wild for here. Roads were closed. Power was out in most of Texas. Our grid just didn't work. So my office is on the north side of town, about 20 minutes from me. And it was a weekend. It was a Sunday night going into a Monday that this happened. There was no way. Oh, my man Brian's in the chat. Hey, what's up, Brian? He's great. He'll be vending the reptile show this weekend. Herp's Reptile Show. So I can't get to my office. There's no way. I know that he's there, but it's like kind of lasting on my mind because we also don't have power, and I'm worried about my family.
Sure.
And I have animals here that I'm trying to secure. But our house didn't. We never got real too cold. We got very lucky. But it got cold in our office. Pipes froze in the walls. It's an old office. Company's been there for 58 years. I have an old office. So I knew he was dead when I came in. So we didn't go in until Friday. So it was below. It was 30 degrees. Somebody had a thermostat recorded it, whatever our alarm system is on, and it got down into the low 30s. I think like 31, 32 degrees. So in my mind, I'm like, man, little homie's out. I go and I open up. I pull out his little cork barks, and there's a little hide that he's usually hanging out in, and he has dug down into the ground and is just sitting there looking at me chilling. I flip on the lights. He's been fine. Just shows the absolute resilience. We're so convinced that, if our ball python's at 91 degrees and not 90, it's going to have an RI and it's going to crap itself and it won't eat a mouse for 2 months. But then now we have the species that's like, oh, you accidentally put me in at 90 degrees. Yeah, I'm fine. Oh, wait, it's 19 degrees. Yeah, hit me up when it's dinner time. So yeah, it's super cool. Just shows and this is a wild caught animal that's like got to be at least 8, 9 years old. I know I'm going to lose him at some point. It's kind of a bummer, I know, because he's just older. But super neat. So that's going to be our forest dwelling. I'm going to mirror what I said with that for my Trottis. For Elegons, they're neighbors. They're everything I've heard, everything I've read about them. They're the exact same as far as care wise. Elegons are a little bit smaller, and the babies are a little bit tougher to get started. Sure. That'll kind of push us up into the desert, arid group. They do live in deserts. There are deserts in Arizona. There are deserts in Nevada. There's deserts in New Mexico. There's deserts in California. But it's not, like you said, like we were saying, it's not rolling sand with a tumbleweed. Though there are tumbleweeds. That's not where you're going to necessarily find them. You're going to find them in rocky, craggy, arid areas. They might not be around water sources. They might be around cactus. They very well might be in these predicaments, but they're crevices and rock fixtures is where they're normally found. As they come more east, they do kind of start inhabiting riverine areas, definitely more forest areas, especially when you get east of Valverde. Freer area, there's a lot of marshy land, some more river run areas. But so the general concept of care for Variegatus and Brevis are the same. I've been lucky to work with both and breed both. Again, reticulatus, not nearly enough is known about them. The Swataki and the gypsocolans, again, I don't have any kind of experience, and I don't know anybody that ever has. Those are going to be your Baja Peninsula guys. There's just not a lot of specific information on those particular species, but it is neat. The only morph that is known in the Coleonyx group is in the Variegatus. There is a leucistic Variegatus, which is a simple recessive.
Okay.
Pretty cool looking. Wish I had a picture to show you. As far as I know, only one person, and that's Nathan Hall, works with them. I've never seen one in person, but I have seen pictures of his, and that's pretty neat. So Brevis, Variegatus. So when you want to kind of look at the care on these guys, you can break it down to do a really simple setup. You do sand, maybe a hot spot of about 86 degrees. You want it to, like all the other Variegatus, all the other Coleonyx, have a cool side. Lots of hides, somewhere moist for them to lay their eggs, and you're probably all right. You know what I mean? That's how I've kept them. I've bred them that way. I did realize that I don't think necessarily sand is the perfect answer. It's just an easy answer, like play sand or repti sand or any of the ones that are not, like these calci sands or these things that have all these dyes and stuff in them. So what I found worked is, and I wish I had pictures and setups. I had like an 18 by 18 cube for my Brevis and at one point for my Variegatus. And if you take sand and you start mixing it with more natural rocks and also with soils, you can generate a terrain that is going to maintain humidity a little bit better, because these animals still come from humid areas, right? It is arid, but it still gets rain. It still needs to hold moisture when the moisture is there. You're not missing them every night. You may only miss them twice a month. But when you miss them, you want it to hold the moisture for at least a little while. I have put UV on these guys before, and to the most extent on these compared to any of the other Coleonyx, I didn't always have UV on them. Again, I bred them in racks a lot, and it was super easy. But once I moved to like stacked slate rocks all the way up the back, use hot glue guns to make sure they don't fall over, because rocks will fall over when two geckos decide to start kissing each other.
Yes.
They're much stronger than you think. But yeah, stacking slate rocks, you find out also. Okay, so sorry, my brain's going 100 miles an hour. You'll find they'll have their little homes that they like to hang out in, and they'll always kind of be sitting towards the edge, ready for food. And variegatus and brevis are ones that are really good if you want to actually interact and feed your animals. Maybe not by hand, but with tongs or something. They're a really good species for that, because they'll sit there like an ambush, ready to go and just snap out. They're a little bit more temperamental. If this is your first time really working with something like this, I don't subscribe to the thought that there's a best beginner animal. The best first reptile is the one that you want the most, and that you're going to put the time and effort into learning about and caring for correctly. So if you really want to work with one of the arid species over one of the forest species, by all means start with that one. They're just a little bit more temperamental. They definitely will drop their tails a lot easier. They're much more defensive. You're not going to be getting them out and holding them. And also, they're kind of like day gecko fast, which is, if anybody's had day geckos, they're very, very, very quick and slippery animals. Again, insectivores mirror what I said on the forest species. Your best bet is to have good bugs coming from good people, or raising your bugs yourself. Again, I stopped supplementing my brevis completely, my brevis variegatus. And again, when I talk about brevis, I'm talking about variegatus. I kept them identical. That band from Texas into New Mexico, into Arizona, into California, that line, the habitat is so similar. The temperatures are so similar. There is, of course, areas that get hotter. There's places that get more rain. There's places with more mountains. But there's so many drawn similarities between those. But yeah, so I always have fresh water for all my animals. Another reason, going back to the substrate, if you're using just sand, I don't know if anybody's ever had luck with springtails and sand, but I don't. But if you wanted to mix up with, right? But you can generate an arid type substrate where you can have. I'm sure you could do isopods too. Again, I don't mess with isopods. I probably should, but you could do springtails in the soil. Springtails are so great for your 3 or 4 inch long lizard that makes tiny little poopies. Springtails will annihilate it, right? And these aren't bull snakes pooping, right? Like I've tried. I cannot do bioactive setups with my bull snakes because I'll just be cleaning out bioactive substrate instead of aspen, right? Yeah. And that's just, I mean, they poop 3 times a week. They poop bigger than I do. Like, I don't know, whatever. But these great little geckos are man, once again, you have this species that fits that caliber really well. That doesn't mean that's how to do it. That doesn't mean that's the best way to do it necessarily. And that definitely doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. But it's a species that works well on that frequency. So back when I was saying some of the coolest enclosures I've ever seen, one of my favorite enclosures I've ever built up was my brevis enclosure. Also, the other cool thing, because it is Texas and it is the greatest state in the universe, they have different locality phenotypes. So the more east you get, the more reds and maroons and these browns. And then you start getting into like your animals over in like your black gap, which are more yellow and more speckled. And then you can get up, I believe they go as far north as like the observatory in that area, which is like south of the Davis Mountains, and they all have these neat little locality looks because they're just like the Alterna. You can have an Alterna from 277 in the Del Rio area in Pandale, and you could show me 10 Alterna, and one of them is from there, and I maybe not me, but there's people out there that would be able to pick it out and say that's the one from there. And then you have one from like the Madera Canyon or Olympia, and people will literally see it and be like, "That's Olympia Canyon animal from the Davis Mountains," and it's nuts.
I love that your entire state is not for everybody in the world, but for a segment of the population in this world. Texas is just divided up by where you find cool stuff. Like nobody is like, oh, we're going to Dallas or Houston or whatever. No, they're like, yeah, it's the one by the Davis Mountains. And if you don't own a map, you better buy one and figure out where that's at. Because I'm not even gonna you guys don't even talk about towns.
No,
it's just like drive down this highway until you see an observatory or a mountain, and then one of the dirt roads off of that, it's over there.
Oh man.
What?
So
what?
I've kept the first snake, and we're going to talk about snakes for a second. The first snake I ever owned was an Alterna. It was in 2003, 2004, and I bought this beautiful little gray banded king snake. Nothing looks like that, right? Nothing does. And it didn't eat, and I got it eating. So that was like my, putting my big boy pants on and learning about snakes. And I never bred gray bandits. I kept them almost my entire life after that. I've had pairs. I've raised them to, the 12, 14-year-old mark. They're great. And I never bred them because I read all the books and something about when they said you got to get them cold. I don't know. It turns out you actually got to get them really cold. And I never really subscribed to the locality thing. And then I walked up to a rock at a named cut, and there was an Alterna there. And I picked it up with my bare hands and looked at it, and my heart is still beating from that moment. And I said, nothing will ever replace this moment in my life. Nothing will ever feel like this again. And now I'm literally like, I look at an Alterna and I'm like, okay, that's Davis Mountains animal. I'm guessing that's Olympia. That's got to be south of the rest area. That's fox cut animal. Okay, yeah, that's fox cut. And then you actually go to the fox cut and you find out that's called the fox cut because there was a litter of fox born there. And now there's a whole little community of foxes. And when you're walking the fox cut, you can hear the foxes barking and chirping. And it's like, what? This is, yeah. So Texas, we like to subcategorize everything. But it's neat because I kind of want to start doing that with brevis. So as I move forward in my herpetoculture life, I'm going to start trying to find brevis from different localities. And say, these are kind of the phenotype of this locality. These are the phenotype of that locality, and these are the phenotype of this locality. And maybe nobody ever cares, and that's great. That's fine, because it'll be a blast to me. Another thing on the brevis variegatus, probably the best species in the world to keep in a 10-gallon glass aquarium with a screen lid. It's like the perfect amount of vision, the perfect amount of ventilation. It doesn't stay hot because you don't want these things to stay hot. I've been there. It's 90 degrees during the day and it's 58 at night. It gets cold at night with these species. They are not 90 degrees the whole time. Do they find areas in the rocks to maintain that heat? Sure. Give them some rocks to maintain their heat, right? Get those rocks hot during the day. Let them cool off throughout the night. Put your lights on cycles. Pull up Valverde County, find out what the current, how many hours of daylight is there, what's the current temperature, see what it is at night. We have these crazy multimedia imaging devices we keep in our pockets that could give us literally endless knowledge on an area. So yeah, brevis and variegatus are a little less intimate in the sense that you're not going to be interacting with them as much, but you're going to see them active much more often. They're not really, you would think looking at them, they're more of like a crepuscular animal. They're going to come out more in the mornings and at night when the sun goes down. They're not. They're almost strictly nocturnal. But you will be able to see, if you have the right setup, neat little things happening in their community. And they also lend themselves extremely well to community life, which excuse me again. We'll talk about. I said that I had seen some of the coolest enclosures I've ever seen with Brevis. So the first one was a massive, had to have been a 15-gallon bowl, like one of these Art Deco fish bowls, and it's turned over, and the opening for it is maybe at like a 45-degree angle, right? It's not right on top. You could tell it's a very unique looking bowl, but it's big. And this guy filled it up with substrate. He was actually growing cactus in it. And he had all these neat, almost like driftwood looking things. You find there's certain types of cactus that have all these little holes in them when the stalk dries out.
Right.
And he had little rocks stacked up in it. And he had a light that came up on one side into the opening that kept it warm. And I believe in the little article he talked about that it was like 90 degrees or something up at the top. It did get up to about 90, and that was fine. And so, but down at the bottom, it was room temperature. So it was this neat little cactus thing. And he was out one day. I mean, I say little. It was not little. It was huge. And the guy was out walking around out in his pastures or whatever. I don't know exactly where he lived, but somewhere in West Texas. And he found this neat little gecko. And he was like, well, this is where I found my cactus. This is where I got these rocks. This is where the dirt came from. I'm going to throw this gecko in this terrarium. I guess terrarium is the right word, right? And he did. And this thing lived for like 20 years. And he fed it little bugs and stuff that he found. And he would just find it scampering around in there. And, he had kind of generated a bioactive enclosure without really knowing what that bioactive was.
Sure.
He never cleaned it. It was almost like a closed system other than putting food in there. And it was big enough that it maintained itself. And I saw some pictures, and goodness, I wish I had the pictures to show you. It was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It was just so pretty, and it was so Art Deco. He had done this kind of bonsai style of decorating it to where it conjures up emotions almost, right? Like you get a feeling when you're looking at it. And then the next coolest enclosure I've seen. These are just ideas. If somebody wants to keep these animals, put them in a plastic bin and stick them against heat tape. They're going to do fine. But if you want to go that extra mile, there's neat ways to do it. It was a 180-gallon saltwater aquarium that this guy had, and I think it got a crack or something. And his kid was a biologist somewhere in Texas, and decided to set it up like as a multi-animal little chunk of West Texas. And they put all these. Okay, so imagine maybe a foot or two of soil, and then he took all of these PVC pipes and jammed them into the ground in all different areas and decorated them, and then huge rock wall. And I think by the time it was all said and done, he had like 40 Coleonyx in there, and they just were this big, huge community. And he had like a feeding bowl, and it looked. By the time he was done with it, it looked like a slice right out of West Texas. I mean, it was perfect. Might as well have been a road cut you were walking by. Little patches of grass, but it was so big, it was able to be maintained like that. You have to have some amount of size to have that happen. And he just a massive amount of these geckos. And he had videos where he would throw food in there, they'd start scampering out and eating, and it's just really neat because they are definitely as Dominique said hi. They're definitely a very community capable species, which isn't really the case with a lot of reptiles. In fact, most reptiles I would say don't keep together. Just don't, right? It's usually just better. But yeah, so I don't know. Bringing the Brevis and the Variegatus is just like the Mitrotus, but there is two different things that are going to happen when they lay their eggs. They're a little bit more. If you have your everyday incubation setup, you want to have something dry to put the eggs on. If the eggs get wet, they're going to go bad instantly. And they're tiny. I mean, you're talking Tic Tacs, maybe like a swollen Tic Tac. But they incubate a little warmer. You're going to have your best bets at like 84 to 86 degrees incubating them. And then at that, you're going to have like 70 to 80 day incubation times. My Trotus, I actually just incubated on my shelf with all my other stuff at like 78 degrees. Same place. I literally incubated them in the same setup that you incubate. My gargoyle geckos, my Leachianus, my cave geckos. Just pick your animal that lives at room temperature. My Trottis are completely capable to be kept at room temperature if you are maintaining proper humidity. The thing with not adding heat is you may have a buildup of moisture, and that's going to cause all kinds of fungus can be grown, gnats, stuff like that.
Right.
So you want to be very conscious of that with just any animal. I've heard of people like, oh yeah, my enclosure builds up a little, mold or whatever. It's a fungus, and I just kind of scoop it out. I'm like, well, if that continues to happen, your animals are breathing that. Your animals are living off of that. It's like a fart in the air. If you're around a fart in the air, you're literally living off of that fart. That fart is giving you life, and so that's the same thing that's happening with fungus and
so poetic.
We're just out here trying. It's life, and that's how life goes.
Just educating.
Yes.
So, do you think you could counter that by increasing ventilation if you chose not to do supplemental heat?
Yes, and that's a good point. Increased ventilation is good to the extent. Also, it depends on what is your reptile room, what's my reptile room like, right? We might have two completely different internal humidities. My room stays somewhere between 40 and 50% humidity, but I can walk to the ocean. It's like that way, 500 yards, and so there's something to say about that. If you're in the middle of the desert, you probably can't have more ventilation. You're and I say desert. It is the desert. If you're in Arizona and you're trying to keep, not even the New Caledonian geckos, but like Coleonyx mitratus. Sorry, brain. If you're trying to keep any of these mitratus or elegans or anything, you're going to struggle with humidity. You just absolutely will.
Right.
That and nosebleeds. So pick your poison.
Yeah, but you can also fight that with substrate depth.
Yeah, and absolutely.
Like there are different ways to mitigate those things, but yeah, and I do hate that it's actually super cool, but so many of the people that I talk to aren't from where I'm from, and so it's like, oh yeah, it's just like 50% humidity here, and for me it's like, well, yeah, in the summertime, definitely not in the wintertime.
No.
And, you're fighting different things based on just the natural parameters of where you live.
When I talk to people about my guards and stuff like that, they're like, well, how often do you miss them? And I'm like, maybe once a day, maybe once every other day. And they're like, oh, I have automatic misting systems that go off every 12 hours that go for 2.5 minutes. I'm like, if I do that, my house would be underwater. So don't. Right. So you are as conscious of a reptile keeper and breeder as you are of your surroundings. If you're going to get into this and you're going to, look, you might have one animal and you're going to figure out how to keep it, and that's going to be great. But you also may want to have a couple hundred, which is great. and if you're going to do that, you need to know every inch of your room. You're going to want to have temperature readouts. You're going to want to have an idea of what your humidity is. You're going to want to have a great idea of water, which is the next thing we're going to get into. You want to know your water quality. You want to know what's in your water. Yes.
Before you get to water, 1 second. Dominique asked about cleanup. Dominique, Kris was talking earlier that he uses springtails as opposed to isopods. So that's where we're at with that. Anyway, sorry.
I'm sure isopods would work, but again, I don't have any experience with them, and I know that they're going to eat the isopods. Water. So eublephaриds in general, and I don't think necessarily leopard geckos are. This is conscious in the leopard gecko community, and I don't know. Eublephaриds are prone to kidney problems. What or why, I don't know the right answer. It was actually the trick to getting cat geckos to do well. Yeah, something about the minerals in water causes eublephaриds in general to have kidney issues. So all of my success with all of my Coleonyx, my cave geckos, now into the Aleoscaloperies. Anyways, the cat geckos, Aleoscatobodes. I don't know. I don't say scientific names ever out loud, so it's weird.
Felinus. I know that part.
Yeah, mine aren't. I have dorsalis. So,
well, then just
yeah. But anyways, I use distilled water, and I read this out of a little research program that somebody had been doing about. Now, is distilled water what you want to be drinking? No, you'll probably eventually die. It's not what your animals need to be drinking, but now you need to find that those minerals. This is where occasional supplementation is going to be necessary, and again, I say occasional because too much calcium is going to be bad. But if you have good, healthy feeders and a very maybe once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks supplementing routine, it's only going to help. And again, I use the distilled water. I've heard people say that there's all kinds of bad stuff about distilled water with reptiles, and that may be the case with other reptiles. But I've been using it for 20 years, 22 years. With Coleonyx specifically, maybe 18 years. I don't know, I had my charts many years ago. And I just remember being young and reading this article about kidney failure. And then it came out that a lot of cat geckos and a lot of Coleonyx and a lot of eublepharid have kidney issues. And I think that there's a direct relation to the type of water and the minerals in those waters. So using distilled water has, again, worked great for me. But
I wish I had known that.
Yeah,
I suck at cat gecko care and have failed at that more than once.
Yes.
And our water here is very hard and is generally crappy. And so I use filtered water for most things, but I was not aware of that. So I will have to change tactics there.
Definitely. Cat geckos are like the barometer of if you're keeping things like absolutely pinpoint. If one thing is off with them, they're dead. Your thing could have been the water. Who knows? I had a few. I had I got some early this year, and I had them, and they looked like poo poo. Mine are wild caught from Borneo, and I tried to, you know, when you like zero in on something, and you're like, I'm going to make this animal work. You're going to live. And I did that for a while, man. And it was almost like every day. I felt like I was bugging them, like double checking things, double checking humidity, double checking temperatures, making sure they're this. How many feeders did I put in the feed bowl, right? Did I give them 10 dubia or did I give them 9? Okay, but I only see 7. That means they had to have eaten 2. They ate 2 this time. Let's go ahead and fill it back up to 10 and see how many they have on Wednesday. I got crazy with them. Oh, they got fat and happy, and they were doing good. They stopped freaking out. I even was able to hold them every once in a while. I don't handle them without gloves often. I have before, but I would suggest wearing gloves just because they're so not weak. Weak's not the right word because they're not a weak animal. They're just sensitive. And so I had a male and a female, and they were adults, and I was so happy. They were gorgeous. I had them for 4 months or something, and I was like, all right, I'm going to pair them up. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try to breed these things. I had this great enclosure. It was, everything was, and I moved them into their new enclosure and paired them up because I didn't pair them up in either one of their enclosures because I didn't want there to be any dominance, any fighting. The male was a little smaller than the female. Perfect. Put them together. Male is dead within 24 hours. And it's just, what?
Oh.
Yeah. How did that work? And so now the female lives in that enclosure. She's doing great. She's super cool. I've even gotten to hand feed her now. She's what a weird, neat species. But yeah, I was taking my shot to breed them, and that just didn't work. One thing I found that's really neat with them, because we're on the subject of eublepharids, even though we're talking about Coleonyx, you need to find little mossy areas and bowls of dirt actually work where they can like curl up in it. They do this little thing during the day where they actually get up and inside and under things and curl up into these tight little balls. And then at night they come out and you can actually watch them kind of crawl out of their little nest. They make nests, I guess is the best way to put it. And if you can, I actually use Tupperware with a layer of dirt, kind of like I do my egg boxes, but then I put a bunch more moss on it and they use that as a little nest to hang out. And it's kind of cool. But yeah. Coleonyx can be as easy as hitting the right parameters, giving them a bowl of mealworms, and keeping it full. And literally, they will breed for you or they can be as complex as your heart desires. You can set them up to do some pretty amazing things, and they're going to be pretty bulletproof. You know what I mean? It's kind of one of the neatest things about them.
Awesome.
Did you have any other questions? I'm gonna take my headset off. Wait, don't ask me any questions real quick. I was like, man, I won't be able to hear you.
No, it's one of those things where I already knew quite a bit about that particular group of geckos because I'm a nerd, but whenever I talk to people like you, it's one of those things where I also am a giant nerd. And so I probably have read a lot of the things or hung out on a lot of the pages and had a lot of similar experiences. And then I'll come across a whole lot of folks who are like, oh yeah, we have leopard geckos in the United States. They're these banded things.
Yeah.
And it's like, it is so much more than that. And it just takes coming across a person who can articulate this so much more than that part.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And yeah, I don't know. It has frustrated me for a long time how cool North American stuff is and how little effort we put into it. And so like you were talking about how one of your geckos got extremely cold. And then you had this man who set up this biotope, and the top of the biotope was 90 degrees and the bottom was room temperature, and the geckos did fine. And you kept a couple of geckos similar to knobtails, and they hung out in the cooler end, but they were fine.
Yeah.
And to hear, so for your average person in herpetoculture to hear things like that, it's weird, or sometimes they don't believe that necessarily.
Yeah.
And because we are in US herpetoculture, Europe and stuff are a little different, but in US herpetoculture, we are obsessed with exotic, beautiful, foreign things. And somehow we're stuck in a mindset of those exotic, beautiful, foreign things are also delicate.
Yeah.
And that what we think of as delicate, I think is actually that it's hard for us to recreate the forests of Yemen when we're keeping veiled chameleons. Or
you can't say a chameleon. Yeah, it's not delicate. It literally made it through evolution for millions of years.
It's just not from Illinois. It's from Madagascar. You know what I mean? And so we struggle to maintain parameters with those things, and we've built a huge industry around it with wonderful equipment, and we can do amazing stuff in our living rooms now that you couldn't do on a space station 20 years ago. It's just it's amazing. And then I look around and I'm like, man, there's some really cool garter snakes I could just keep in my closet. If I feel like we're all collectively a little bit dumb because we don't do that. So like the folks on the Reptile Gumbo podcast, I listen to them all the time. They're super cool. And James is keeping rubber boas, and he got a wine cooler just to cool these things.
Yeah.
Cools them to 40 degrees. And they live in the Southeast, of course. It's very warm where they live, and recently moved to Texas, actually. And he was losing his mind on one of the episodes because he looked in the wine cooler door and they were just wandering around.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you don't understand. I set it to 40 degrees. And several folks that had talked to them on their podcast were like, well, yeah, man, they're from Idaho.
Yeah.
Like it snows there. And
they're native. Yeah.
People have seen them. Like there are iconic pictures of North American snakes in snow.
Yeah.
And
it's totally a thing.
Not like staged herping photos. Like it's always some goober who's out there looking for birds and like doesn't care about reptiles. And they're like, oh, hey, did you know that alligators in South Carolina freeze? I was out here fishing and saw one. That's cool.
Yeah.
And then all of us who would cut off our pinky finger to see that are like, oh my God, it turns out you can freeze alligators, or just like stupid things.
Yeah.
But what I really want to do is keep a Madagascar mountain chameleon in Illinois. So I'm going to recreate the left side of my living room to replicate that. And what? Like, just keep a red-sided garter snake. They're super cool, or whatever. Like, it bugs me so much when I see guys like you post things and I hear you talk, and it's like, oh, those are amazing, and they're like, oh yeah, they're from here. You didn't know that?
Yeah. and it's funny,
man.
We evolve. I was talking with a very close friend of mine who's a big time Alterna king snake, older guy, older generation, and he's been doing this twice as long as I have. And I was like, do we all just evolve into North American colubrid guys? Is that retirement for every single person into reptiles, right?
Yeah,
like
everybody realizes, oh wait, for 4 months out of the year I don't have to feed them.
Yeah,
and they can live in my closet. Done.
Yeah,
done.
so I have friends come over, and kids come over, and they're like, I want to see Shrek. So I get out my big old goober, dumb Leachianus, who's 300 and something grams. I was like, I'm about to grab him right now. And I get him out, and he's awesome. And the kids, oh, look, he's so cool. And I get these neon red, gargoyle geckos, which are amazing. I mean, they're all amazing. And they're like, oh, let me pet its belly. That's so cool. And then I'm like, but look at this really cool little terrestrial gecko from Texas, right? Like, we get these here. They're like 2 hours away. We could go flip tin and maybe find one. And they're like, oh, it's brown. I'm like, yeah, but it's the best brown. And it's got yellow. And you notice the spots?
It's not just brown.
Yeah, it's not just brown. It's so many other colors of brown. And it's funny. We find these, and I have neon colored animals that are just beautiful and amazing, and they blow our minds, and they still do blow my minds. And it's so unnatural looking from something that is actually natural.
Right.
That it's like, there's no way that this is and I'm just grabbing something. This is a naturally occurring animal in the Nueve Leon mountains, right? Yep. Like, that is an animal that's real. That is out there. You could go pluck that off of a rock, maybe, if you're really lucky. And also, it's massively illegal. It's super illegal. Don't do it. There's probably a couple generations of line breeding in that animal, but regardless,
for legal purposes, that was
illegal. Yeah. Please, allegedly. But at the same time, what makes that animal special? Is it love at first sight? Is it that first initial, the thing that really snaps? But then we start keeping these animals, and I think we evolved to start really appreciating these subtle nuances, attitudes. It could be the attitude of the animal. It could be the way it reacts to you. It could be the way it interacts with you. It could be the highs and lows of keeping that species over 10 years. Oh man, it didn't die when it froze. You know what I mean? There's these little highlights, and so then we start finding things like Coleonyx, and it's like, I've had knobtails. I did not have a lot of success with knobtails. In fact, if you want to find some amazing knobtails, my buddy Brian Levins over at Levins Reptiles produces some amazing stuff. But right next to those knobtails, I had a tub with variegatas, and I had a tub with brevis. And I remember looking at them and watching these animals that are kept at very similar parameters, high 80s, sand, rocks. You're missing them on frequent schedules. And I was like, wow, what? These are amazing. And they're both amazing, but it's like, I know that this one maybe doesn't look like googly-eyed Pikachu, but then you start looking at it and you realize that it does. You're just conditioned to see that look in an animal because that's the North American phenotype, right? So yeah, I mean, I could talk about it forever. They're an extremely exciting little gecko. As somebody who kept and bred Phelsuma of all different species for a lot of years, I work with a lot of New Caledonian stuff, and haven't worked with some of that. Working with some of the Pachydaculus species, the Coleonyx really stand out. There's just something neat about them, and like you were saying, if you could design or not design or come up with some kind of an enclosure that they could not climb the sides of, because that's one of the neat things. Now the smaller ones, the Brevis, the Variegatus, they're still like they can climb some stuff, man. Like they got these tiny little feet, and they could just stick into stuff. But you could do a world of amazing things with these animals, and I do understand the reason they're not popular is because there's not albino leucistic patternless reverse stripe Oreo cookie ones, and that's just part of evolution, right? These are a more evolved species, so they're going to be less likely to have genetic mutations. So they're more refined. Their genetic mutations have already been refined down to a species that is more, I hate to say perfect in evolution's eye, but more refined in evolution's eye. So there are the leucistics out there, and I would love to, maybe someday work with them or just find out more information about them. I don't know enough. But yeah, maybe someday somebody will find an albino mitratus or something, and it'll change the hobby forever. But for now,
I do think there's something to be said for. Okay, so like earlier, you said, or North American colubrids, how we all retire, or what,
It is.
And it not necessarily all North American colubrids, right?
Right.
I think it's funny. Not funny. It is unique that a great many of those folks do seem to come back to animals that are frequently found in the American Southwest, and I think that you could probably how to say that you could probably partition those segments of herpetoculture in the same way that you could partition any population in the US, okay? In that there are going to be people who, like, the American Southwest is iconic and it's romanticized in a great many different things in popular culture. And
Sure.
There is definitely folks who are from that part of the world, and it carries a certain sincerity to them. And then there is like a generation like the Trumbauers and the folks who were just like one generation ahead of us, I guess, behind, in age or what have you, where it was idealized and it was romanticized and it was made into something for that generation. And so it became very important to them. And they happened to be herp nerds. And they were around as herpetoculture progressed. And so they got into morphs and they got into chameleons and all the exotic things or what have you.
Yeah.
But because of their generation, it still carried that romantic notion. And as they slowed down or, didn't want to put in as much work and time later in life, kind of went back to it with the ease of care of that they live where we live,
Sure.
And now with herpetoculture being the way it is, where it is fairly industrialized and social media has changed a lot of things, it is that still exists, right?
Yeah.
Then it's being carried by people who are from where you're from.
Yeah.
But I think herping is what is keeping that, and now a little bit making it more prominent in herpetoculture, because as herping becomes more prevalent, it's easiest for folks in the US to herp in the US.
Yeah.
And even before COVID and all that stuff happened. But now with COVID, it for sure is, because you don't have to travel.
Yeah.
And the iconic place to do that is in the American Southwest. And of the American Southwest, the super iconic place to do that is Western Texas. And
that's right.
And so it's kind of having its renaissance right now, I think, because herping is also having a bit of a renaissance.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of those things where I don't necessarily know that as the newer folks in herpetoculture come in, or even the current existing folks that keep ball pythons and cresties and beardeds and they're super important to herpetoculture, and they help a lot of things. They have a major industry base in far as their spending habits and things, and they make a lot of stuff possible. I just don't know. It's going to be differentiated out like regular population dynamics of who in that group cares that Texas is beautiful, or wants to know about rattlesnakes in Arizona or whatever, and it's always going to kind of be a small segment, you know. And as people progress through herpetoculture, you know, there's like Bill Love, Trumbauer, and like 6 other people that are in that set. And then for me and you, there's a couple hundred of us, right? We all we all listen to NPR or the Herpetoculture Network or whatever, and we all somehow are probably in some way connected in a YouTube chat or on Facebook.
Right.
There just aren't that many of us.
No.
And so I think that's what you're seeing in that progression is we have been able to keep very exotic things and hard or advanced things.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work and a lot of expense. And we now have a skill set to develop to be able to do that. And we're quote unquote really good at it.
Yeah.
And then so now we are far enough in to see what Bill and Kathy and those guys, you know, what they were all talking about when they're like, hey man, you know how freaking cool corn snakes are?
Dude.
Yeah, they are, you know, because we've progressed to that point of you talk a lot about where these animals are from, and you talk a lot about observing animals and seeing the things that they do, and all of those natural history details is in a lot of the way that you speak, and far less of that is in which brand of light you use and in your enclosure brand or what have you, because that's a thing, and I'm sure you have those opinions and what's have you.
Yeah.
But you've kind of matured past talking about that, I guess. It's not as important. This is just, I'm just saying your opinions with what I think of how it
no
is. It seems like at the stage that you and I are at in herpetoculture is, I don't really care. Like, I'm sure people make substrates, and you said that earlier. You're like, whichever substrate, I don't care, you know.
Yeah.
And it's progressed to. Did you know that cat geckos curl up and do that? You know, and those little things are much more important now.
We can. We're in betweeners, man. We're in betweeners. We could sit and tell people the exact recipe to make this work. I can tell you step by step, day by day, how to raise a gargoyle gecko up to an adult, how to breed it, and probably even make money off of it, right? Like I could write a whole book about it. Somebody already did that and gave us that information. Who their name is, I'm not entirely sure, but we can go back and find it. Do you want to breed? I had Alterna for 20 years, 15 years, something like 15 years. And I'm sitting down with my great buddy, John Lassiter, who's a well-known name in the king snake community, and we're drinking beers. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I had pairs and I just never got them to breed. And he was like, oh, okay, well, how long did you cool them for? What temp did you cool them at? And I was like, I didn't cool him. He's like, you have Applegate's book, right? I was like, yeah. And he's like, you got Trumbauer's book. You got all these people's books, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, and you read them, right? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, why didn't you listen? We already told you how to do this. We gave you the exact. Did you think that we told you this is how to do this because you don't need to? And I was like, oh man, you're right. Huh. It's so weird because I'm still looking up to these people that were part of the first founding or within that first realm of first founding generations. And I'm like, I'm still every single day, even if we could call it learning, but it's not even learning. It's neurologically clicking, right? Like, oh, it's because when you go there, it's literally 58 degrees in Madera Canyon in the middle of the summer. I was literally walking a cut in the Madera Canyon. It was 58 degrees. We were checking temperatures, and somebody had caught an alternative there on those rocks the night before. I saw blacktail rattlesnakes, lepidus. We saw the Mexican night snakes that are over there. We see these things on the rocks. It's 58 degrees. The rock temperature is like 62, right? They're not digesting their meals on a hot rock and calcium sand, right? They are so much more complex than we're ever going to realize, right? And so somebody came out and said, yeah, tub, aspen, hide box, clean water, ventilation, this temperature for this long, feed them on this regimen, cool them to this temperature, and now you can breed them. After I tried for 30 years to figure it out. Here's this golden little package. And then you take that beautiful golden little package and you say, no, you're wrong. And throw it away and say, there's a new way to do this. And now that doesn't mean that we can't find new practices to help those practices. And doesn't mean we can't evolve into new practices that will help all of this. But we cannot throw away the foundation of what was done for us. Were some things done wrong? Yes. And I can go through and find videos of 18-foot reticulated pythons in 6-foot cages, and maybe I don't agree with that. But, it exists, and it's there, and these people... Anyways, this is a totally different subject. But yeah.
No, man, it's a real thing, though. And I love it. I love hearing old timers. Most frequently, I've heard quite a few guys on NPR, and they have been really good at tracking down folks who probably are of the generation that don't really do the tech thing.
And, that's the thing.
And they have been able to talk to some of those guys, and this subject for me is totally encapsulated in, and I totally forget the man's name they were speaking to, but was significantly older, and Owen from NPR is really into white lips.
Mm-hmm.
They're a really big deal to him, and this man was that's cool, and how is it? And I'm not trying to make fun of him.
No.
He was old enough that like he would frame questions in, like, he actually said, like, so how do you kids do it now?
It's totally true.
Eric's in his 40s, and Eric was like, I'm a grown man, but like,
right.
The guest was quite a bit older than all of us,
sure,
right? And so that that was how he was talking, was so what do reptile people do nowadays? Like, you guys have LEDs and crazy stuff. He was very impressed with the current state of herpetoculture because he was elderly, and they were telling him all this cool stuff and so on and so forth, and as the episode progressed, the man said something to the effect of he had bred white lips on accident. And so, of course, everybody starts giving Owen a hard time. And he was like, oh, yeah, we left them in this box or whatever. And back then we used chicken lamps and they went out or something stupid. They got cold. And then we fixed it and went and bought some new chicken lamps and warmed it back up, and then it had eggs. It was amazing, and it's stuff like that where, and then of course Owen was like, this is ridiculous, I can't even breed them, and I have thousands of dollars of enclosures, and super fancy things, and we do that, right? Where we're so like the Barkers bred every python you could ever breed.
Yeah,
like
all of them.
What are we doing? Like, do what they did.
Yeah.
Why are you messing with it? Like, now, like, a lot of people are progressing to, Indonesian, Asian colubrids and things that haven't been in U.S. herpetoculture, and we're trying to advance in that way. But from this angle, it's like, well, we're 150 generations into leopard geckos and no generations into Coleonyx geckos.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
What are you doing? You guys know how to breed leopard geckos by the warehouse.
Yeah.
And
literally.
And minus the handling, good pet for a 7-year-old thing. All of the concepts translate to these, and not just Coleonyx. There's probably a ton of geckos from that kind of environment where, all right, we'll just swap out this set of drawers for a different species, and maybe that would work. And I don't know, it's just weird that we have such a framework in existence and then don't really utilize it, but for like 12 species that are the mainstays of herpetoculture.
Yeah, it's just weird, right?
And like everything that you described to me, I was like, leopards and fat tails.
Yeah.
Everything that I do for my leopards and everything I do for my fat tails, I could do for every species you just described and probably be successful.
Yeah, like there's some the forest dwellers are going to be cooler temps, and then your arid species that are going to be the more northern are literally can be kept in the same tubs as leopard geckos, the same, probably the exact same setup. You could take the leopard gecko out, put the brevis in there, and with the exception of food size, that's they're definitely different sized geckos. The brevis and variegatus. I don't know if I mentioned that. Brevis and variegatus are smaller. They're about 4 inches tip of nose to tip of tail, maybe 2 inches snout to vent, 2 1/4. And then the mitratus are the biggest ones that are available in the hobby. Obviously, reticulatus is not in the hobby. So mitratus are going to be 6 to 6.5 inches, tip of nose to tip of tail. So that's kind of just you pick your size. But I have kind of larger sized hands. I can reach an octave on a piano, but you can see the mitratus in my hands in that picture that you shared. That's the biggest one I've ever seen, ever, like literally ever. And that may just be because he's been so big. Talking about how we keep animals, and like perfectly about how I'm saying keeping the Coleonyx, if you want to keep them on paper towels or whatever, there's a couple parameters you want to hit, and that's going to be your, they're going to need moist hide boxes because they go on, it's where they shed. But there's like parameters, right? There's temperatures you want to hit, and there's humidities you want to hit, and to some extent, I think they actually need some type of substrate, right? So you click those boxes. Well, people are like, well, no, you have to keep them bioactive. You have to keep them with UVB. You have to keep them with this. And then some people are like, no, it's not necessary. You don't know what you're talking about. I've been doing this 20 years. I think the honest answer on that is all of these different things work. The biggest variable in any reptile's life is the owner, the keeper. If you don't have the willingness and want to keep up with that animal for the next 10, 15 years, it's probably not going to have its best life anyways. So having set up the beautiful bioactive terrarium or just putting it on paper towels, in the end, it's going to end up being what you did that maintained it, right? Like we have to maintain them. Mm-hmm. I've kept and gotten North American rat snakes from literal hatchlings all the way to adults in what I call bioactive tubs, which is soil and moss setups, misting them every once in a while, springtails, water bowls. Sometimes you overflow, like it's a rainy day. Sometimes you let dry out for a week, and experimented with that. I've also kept North American rat snakes on paper towels and got them to adult size. And now usually I switch over to some kind of a bedding and bred them. So there's, if you are not going to put in the work to maintain these animals, it doesn't matter what you think is the better setup, right? In the end, the bioactive, it's not truly like a fully bioactive system, has worked. These animals have inherently worked great in those setups because of ease of cleaning. The less I have to interact with an animal that wants to pretend it's a scorpion and throw its tail at me, probably the better for its life. Now, if you do want one that you want to interact with, get a Mitratus. They're great. The problem is, if somebody out there is buying one, you're not buying it captive bred, or it's very small. You're going to be getting a wild caught animal, and they're not. I mean, they were like at the DMV in line, already in a bad mood, and some dude literally grabbed him and threw him in a bucket, right? So and then now you just showed up at PetSmart and got your little cardboard box with holes punched in it, and you're shaking because you're so excited to get home, and and then you let it out, and the animal's probably not happy. So things to think about with it. Yeah,
that's also experience in herpetoculture, right? Is knowing that when you and I were growing up, ball pythons sucked because they wouldn't eat. They fasted. They fasted every winter. All the problems, and now they're awesome. The ball pythons that I have for shows, they eat off tongs, they eat chicken, they eat rats. They don't care. They're great. Mm-hmm. They're a wonderful animal. And reticulated pythons, they came in huge and angry. They hated everyone, so on and so forth. And now we breed them all over the place, and they're pretty cool. Yeah. And it's just a progression through herpetoculture itself.
Sure.
And so if you are right, that's kind of a catch-22, right? If you are so new in herpetoculture that you are trying to start out with a small gecko that you feel comfortable interacting with, then you probably are also so new to herpetoculture you don't really know the history of that kind of thing and why it's so easy to start with a leopard gecko or crested gecko or bearded dragon, and how that ease lends itself to you having a good experience.
Yeah.
As opposed to if you bought a captive bred Coleonyx, you would probably have a wonderful experience. But those people are genuinely ignorant of that, in that they lack the knowledge. They just didn't know the difference, which sucks. And that's kind of incumbent on, people like us to try and show them, but there aren't enough of us at every reptile show to do that,
Yeah. It's tough. It's like the corn snake versus ball python versus this versus that. And I've had kids come up and I like to do this thing where if I hatch out normal corn snakes, I get them feeding and I give them away to kids at shows. Of course, if their parents are okay with it, and maybe it's a situation where they didn't know, they didn't have enough money for something else. And I always have this question asked to me: Is this the best first snake? And I always say I don't know. The best first snake is a really good book by Kathy Love and a toy, a stuffy for your first year. You know what I mean? The best first snake is the one that you want to keep alive, because you have to actually keep it alive. Ball pythons are great. Bredli are great. Garter snakes are great. Corn snakes are great. There's so many things that are great. But you can still have a bad experience with all of those animals. You can still get the corn snake that doesn't want to eat. You could still keep that ball python too cool, and it gets an RI and it just never bounces back from it. You can have a negative experience with every animal. Are there some that inherently? I think the best stuff, kind of similar to these Coleonyx, are the ones that deal with changes, especially like random changes. Like Boom, the power goes out. Now it's freezing for 4 days. Like, yeah, the animal was fine. Wow, right? If that was a ball python, I don't think we would have seen similar results.
Right.
But that's not always true. These things are resilient. They went through the multi-million year evolution of being mostly prey, right? Like
Yes.
Snakes are mostly prey. It's funny. People think they're just like these apex predators. And it's like, no, they have 14 billion babies in the clutch because they are eaten by literally everything.
Yep.
The average lifespan.
A lot of birds.
Yeah. The average lifespan of a snake is literally probably the day it is born, right? Like most snakes hatch and like leave the wherever they were laid and get eaten. Geckos are the same way.
I was going to say, I would argue that a lot of reptiles.
Yeah.
I mean, really anything that lays a big cluster of eggs in a nest, the likelihood is that the vast majority of them either don't hatch because a lot of stuff makes a living off of eating eggs, or if they do, that first scramble to the tree or to the water is it. Like you make it or you don't,
Exactly. And geckos, Coleonyx are a great example of this. Coleonyx will literally lay eggs every like 3.5 weeks. You get 13 to 14 clutches out of a Mitratus in a year.
Good Lord.
That some people could say that there's an issue with overbreeding. If you're doing that, it's probably true. If you have a pair in a tiny little tub like this, it's probably not going to go well for the female. If you have a big enough enclosure or maybe enough females, you will find that they're not a super. They don't have a great hatch rate compared to most things. I have like a really great hatch record with gargoyle geckos. I'm going to knock on wood. I think I'm on gecko like 120 something straight with not having one fail to hatch. Every single one has hatched, and I'm lucky. Wow. But Coleonyx probably have like a 70 to 75% hatch rate, right?
Really?
They just don't. Yeah, but they lay a ton of eggs. Wow. And that's one of those things. And so a gargoyle for me may lay 4, possibly 5 clutches a year. Double that, right? So you're actually producing more of another species. Yet these things are all from Gecko Day, and they're all genetically evolved from the same place, kind of to some extent. So yeah, it's man. I would love to see more people working with Coleonyx. There's a lot of line breeding that can be done with them. Some of the ones I produced, my buddy Cameron over in Florida has some that I produced Mitratus that are banded that had little stripes on them. Brian Levin's produced a Mitratus this year that's dang near patternless. And it's just super cool looking. And so there's wow. we could do some selective breeding with them. We could work with, it's just like anything else. But we've got to get them out there in the hobby. Now that everybody's dialed into Facebook and Instagram, and we can start showing off some of these species that are like really, really easy to maintain, really, really easy to breed, and then really, really interesting, right? And I think that's kind of cool. One thing I guess I kind of didn't mention this. If you're going to be breeding Variegatus and Brevis, you are going to want to give them a cooling period, just like anything that's from that arid environment. Like I said, it gets really cold at night. It gets really hot during the day. During the winter, it maintains a pretty cool temperature. It's maybe not 32, 30 degrees, but it does stay at 50 for like 3 months. So I do cool them. Mitratus, I never did. Mitratus, I just kind of kept together year round and let them do their thing, gave them enough space to do their stuff, and never had a problem. They're pretty neat. I don't know, man. Anything else you can think of on the old Coleonyx?
Not really, man. We actually are cruising up to 2 hours. So
oh goodness, sorry.
No. This was the whole idea. My thought is that my goal was Coleonyx and kids, and we mostly did 2 hours of Coleonyx, which I'm great with, because it was a lot of information, because it is a lot of information. There's a whole complex of species. There's a multitude of things that I honestly feel like a lot of folks genuinely don't know. So I'm glad that all of that information was put out into the ether. It's necessary. I think so this is a sort of a tangent, and then we'll try to wrap things up. But Terry Burwell posted on Instagram that he has Angolan pythons available.
Yeah.
And I was super excited, and I was like, hey man, that's really great. Yada, yada. I think they're a really cool snake. And someone, he had it in his story, and then he made a post or something. Anyway, someone shared, I don't fully understand how Instagram works, but I think they shared his story to theirs, maybe, whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
His picture ended up on somebody else's story, like, hey, congratulations.
Yeah.
And the person posted, look how cool this is, or whatever. It's not a ball python. And which is fine.
Yeah.
And the very first thing I thought was, well, no kidding, it's an Angolan. Like, you had to post for people that wasn't a ball python. Like, I kind of got my old man thing on.
Yeah.
I was like, who doesn't know that? Like,
yeah,
or whatever. But that's important. Like, there are a bunch of people that didn't know and thought Terry made like the coolest ball python ever, or what have you. And it's like, no, they're different and they're really cool. And I saw that while I was sitting here thinking about what we were going to talk about tonight. And I was like, man, it is the same thing.
Yeah.
Because I had that thought of, well, who didn't know that was an Angolan? Right before I had the thought of sharing your picture that you sent me. And then I was going to be that idiot that posted, hey, it's not a leopard gecko. Check this out. And then somebody was going to read it and go, well, of course it's not a leopard gecko, you young whippersnapper, or whatever.
Which you know what's funny? Aren't Angolan pythons very closely related to ball pythons?
Yeah. Yes.
And see, Coleonyx are extremely closely related to leopard geckos. If leopard geckos didn't come in 30,000 different flavors and we just had leopard geckos, we could literally sit here and just be like, the North American leopard gecko, right? And it's not a false statement. But it's kind of funny that we have to like kind of go out of our way to say, oh, well, yeah, it's just like that,
right?
But it's not that. Right. But I mean, goodness, thank you so much to ball pythons. They are the Tiger Woods of herpetoculture. Golf was literally not even popular until Tiger Woods got involved. We had this young, awesome golfer that came in that had the style. Everybody loved him. He was charming, and everybody on this planet knows who Tiger Woods is. Yep. Everybody knows what ball pythons are. They've seen them. They love them. And if it wasn't for that, I guarantee you there are breeders out there that are working with amazing, amazing animals that started with ball pythons.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I kind of maybe because I was before ball pythons, I never lusted after them. Not that I don't think they're beautiful, and not that they aren't. They are gorgeous, special animals. I mean, some of these combinations are just insane. But I kind of grew up with the kind of corn snake craze, and then remember mid '90s when I'm kind of coming to cognitive herper, right? When I'm at 95, I'm 10 years old, seeing Alterna and Reptiles magazine, and that was like the thing. And then you get your little AOL disc, you get online, you get on kingsnake.com, and like that's it. People went out into West Texas and found this. Now they got it used to be at a reptile show if somebody had an Alterna, that was like boom. And then that was the colubrid craze. And then everything dipped off when the ball pythons happened, and all of a sudden Mexican black kings are $35. And then ball pythons go insane. And then that literally took a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So by that happening, everything is gone. And now ball pythons are still a lucrative thing to get into. I have to assume. I see the prices on these things, and they're extremely expensive. they're still all beautiful, but now we have so many species being produced on a regular basis that nobody would have ever thought. Mandarin rat snakes could not be kept. You could not keep them alive. Every magazine article, nobody could do it. And now you have these hot shots like Matt Most and Clint Bartley, and they post pictures of these things. They're producing them every year, and it's like, whoa. And then they come out and they're like, this is the easiest animal on the planet to keep alive. You guys were just, people just did it wrong. And now we know. And they're doing that with species after species after species after species. And it's
file snakes.
Right? File snakes.
Those guys produce, just this year, I have seen multiple people, Matt Most, of course, but several others.
Yeah.
File snakes all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, what? Like, that's impossible. I've read that that's impossible a lot. And they're like, nah, we're pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And these guys are all like our generation, and then now we found out that every single person our age has a dirty little secret, and we all love Nerodia, right? We just never wanted to say it out loud. And now it's like everybody, we got to have this like moment of clarity where we all get to come out and be like, yes, I do love the snakes that smell like poo-poos all the time. Yes, they're great. And it's so funny. Bull snakes, everybody hated snakes. Oh, they're just sassy and loud and big, and they poop all the time.
Yep.
And I, obviously I have bull snakes. I have bull snakes for many, many years. And I'm like, you're right. They are loud and mean and sassy and poop big all the time. And I love every single thing about that. You know what I mean? These things have personality. They have gumption. They have, they're neat because fluctuations in temperatures and stuff like that change how they act, because in their natural habitat, those fluctuations in temperatures let them know what they need to be doing. It's cold. They need to be looking for somewhere to huddle down and maybe not sleep, but maybe brumate or whatever. It's starting to slowly warm up. They're cruising a lot. They're looking for females. They're looking for mates. So it's just, and now because we have all these platforms and podiums to stand on and yell from, we get to do this with Coleonyx. We get to do this with Goniurosaurus. We get to do this with these ridiculous animals that we just didn't know. We didn't. I'm sorry. We always knew about. We just didn't know other people might be interested in them too.
For sure. Yeah, and as much as we yell about social media and stuff, and it has its detractions, it's facilitated that, right, to where you can yes, that you can finally, and I think yes, we are finding those other people who have interest in what we have interest in, but I think the bigger thing is that we are finding people who are successful with them.
Yeah.
And to show you that you can do that. And that maybe this is the thing you were missing, or this is the part of the puzzle. And there are the few one-offs where, like, Matt and those guys really did kind of invent their own wheel to make some of those work. Like they are paving that road.
Yeah, they're literally the only ones that have done it.
Yeah. But then it lets the rest of us explore that, right? Where it's like, oh, well, if he can play with weird Asian snakes, then I can try and do that with some goofy water snakes or what have you. And it just makes it more accessible to you, either in your frame of mind or in examples of how they're doing what they're doing or what have you, or just like kind of the support aspect of it, I guess.
Yeah.
Where I like weird little agamas and different things, and I'm convinced that I will make the painted agama overtake the bearded dragon. That's my own personal weird thing. I'm convinced of that. But and I have like 4 friends that know that and are like, dude, painted agamas, they're going to take over the bearded dragon world. And, and if they say it enough times, it will happen. But that's how Nerodia became popular. Because 40 of us were on Instagram and we saw, like Dark Horse Herp or people like that.
Chris Montrose,
he's like, hey, did you know these were cool? And we were all like, yeah, we knew, but we didn't tell anybody. And he's like, oh yeah, no, I got it. And just floods it. And we all support it and we share it. And we're like, I told you these were awesome. This guy will show you how awesome they are. You know?
And then he's like, oh, by the way, I breed literally not only every species, but almost every single locality of these. And you're just like, whoa, here we go.
Yeah. And it just lets you, it gives you that support or lets you support them either way.
So
it
like,
can be really cool.
We look at these people that, it's these people are putting in work to highlight animals that are maybe not as common. And then we come back and we look at like the Coleonyx and stuff like that. And we say, okay, well, we could do that with these too. I feel like Coleonyx would find a better place. And this is one thing I really hate about them. If they were more expensive, if they were $150 a gecko, people would respect them more. And that's just the fact of the matter. But anyways, it's a well, yeah, I could keep them and breed them, but what am I going to do with them? I'm only going to make $30 a baby or $50 a baby. Well, if you were really worried about making money off of these animals, you probably don't have the space, time, and dedication to actually make money on reptiles, right? Like I've got a lot of reptiles, and I'm pretty sure I don't make money on reptiles, right? Like I've got a lot of them.
I make no money. I make no money on reptiles. Yes,
I'm pretty sure I only spend money on reptiles, and I produce like 130 snakes and maybe 60 geckos this year, and I'm like for sure that I sold all of them, and I don't know where that money is, and I've never seen it.
I produced 0 reptiles this year, and then I'm now paying money to talk to you on the internet. There are dumber things to spend money on, kids.
Turns out. But I could talk for hours about this. There's North American species that we could be trying to highlight, trying to work with, and I think some of our. I'm going to say this right. I'm going to say it right. Get ready for it, Bill. Solophoris, some of our spiny lizards, are some of just the most beautiful species I've ever seen. I got to see collared lizards running up walls in West Texas. Collared lizards. Come on, peoples. You know what I mean? Like, these things exist. Long-nosed snakes.
Yes.
One of the most beautiful animals on the planet. And they're, like, right down the street from me. And I've seen them, and I'm like, why doesn't anybody work with these? And I'll ask some old Colubra guys. And I'm like, why doesn't anybody breed these things? And they're like, wait, what are you talking about? I got a pair. I breed them. And they're like, you're like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, I caught some in 2018 and been breeding them for 2 years. Like, what do you do with the babies? I give them to my buddies. I'm like, well, we're buddies.
I trade them with 4 guys at a Waffle House.
Yeah, right.
If you don't go to that Waffle House, you don't get any.
These are the same guys that tell the stories about the first Daytona wasn't actually a reptile show. We just met up at the same hotel on the same day. And then you just went to different rooms to see that, this person. And I'm like, can I go to that? I want to go to that too. Like, I want to go to the Super Show, but I also want to go to that. Can you please have me back to your hotel room?
I will tell you that the NARBC that got canceled due to COVID, that NARBC, I've been to a bunch, and I'm from where the Tinley.
Yeah, you're from Tinley. I mean, it's like a thing.
The canceled NARBC that was hosted in the parking lot and in people's hotel rooms. Me and my daughter went shopping for tarantulas in some lady's living room. She was like 30 minutes from Tinley. She wasn't even the vendor. She was one of their friends. Her kid just sat at the front door and was like, are you here for the spider people? They're in the dining room. And you went in there. You went in the living room and everybody was just sitting around the living room. And then if you wanted to shop,
that's beautiful.
Their dining room, like cabinet where you put your fancy plates and their table was just covered in cups of spiders.
That's so awesome.
And then you went in the kitchen to pay, and they had a stack of T-shirts if you want. Yeah. So, it was the coolest reptile event I've ever been to. And then we went.
Awesome.
we went and bought isopods in a parking lot somewhere. Like, it was awesome.
Yeah,
it
so
was super cool.
It's so genuine. It's such a real feeling. All of those people live for that moment where you are in their, when you're in their kitchen and they're like, half this stuff will kill you. Oh, pass the salt. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's the best. It's the passion, man. And I don't know. It's amazing. There's a lot there. There is so much left to do. There's so much more for us to highlight, so much more for us to learn about. And we don't have to. We could just keep doing what we're doing. But we can. And man, it's. I think I talked about this last time we were there. We are in one of the most special times in herpetoculture right now, where it's the convening of young, technological savvy, socially adept young people, and all of this bank of knowledge that still exists in the clouds for us, and it's a special place to be. It's gonna be great. I see Brian was saying that he has some Eastern college. My man, we're gonna talk about this weekend. Brian's gonna be vending at the Herps Corpus Christi Reptile Show in Robstown, Texas. It's going to be August 14th and 15th. Come see me at table C13. I will be there with my Badlands herpetoculture setup. We'll have a multitude of geckos, colubrids. Come have a beer. Come say hello. Shake hands. Don't touch me. COVID's scary. It's going to be great.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But yeah, man, we'll have to do another episode for kids and herping.
For sure.
I'll give you.
Thinking of that, I think since I brought them up earlier, I might try to talk to the Reptile Gumbo podcast folks, and maybe we can all get together. I know James and Katie's daughter, she keeps a couple of things, and then Robert's son actually does a lot of the corn snake breeding with his wife. So their kids are pretty heavily involved. We've actually talked about a couple of different kid things in the past. So maybe we can try to do kind of a group thing where we all get together and talk about the kids and how they're included. I think it'd be pretty cool. So we will definitely get you on again to talk about kids. I think that's cool. Like, my kids are getting a little bit older. They're all in their teens now.
Yeah.
But they've been doing it since they were like 3. So
yeah,
it's a big deal, man. And it is a facet of being an adult and being in this hobby, is whether or not you include your spouse or how it's included and your kids and so on and so forth. And like, because so few of the people who I think participate in this aspect of the social media for herpetoculture.
Yeah.
So few of those people are like single pet owners.
Yeah.
It would be rare for a person who just owns a couple of geckos to listen to us. Right. I have actually it's been pretty cool. Like, I have a pretty big audience of listeners, and I mean, I've just got to assume that it's a pretty serious part of their life is this hobby. And so that's obviously going to start to bleed out into family and kids and so on and so forth. And
I'm interested. I wonder if there was like a percentage. I wish we had like a poll, right? And you could ask every viewer, how many animals do you actually have? Is it like
make one?
It's going to happen. See,
I'll make it. I for sure.
That would be awesome, right? Like, do you have 1 to 5, which is a common, like, that's the number, right? Like, I bet 90% of reptile owners are like 1 to 5.
If you talk to USARK folks, we guys like us and women as well, and women actually are an even smaller percentage, of course.
Sure,
we're probably like the top 2 to 4% of people keeping reptiles as far as size of collection. And, things like that. Yeah, it's a very small amount of herpetoculture that is like us.
It's It's weird. I don't know why people wouldn't want to be like this. It's life, right? Like
we're fairly awesome.
it always, I feel this is great, right? It's never ever even kind of stressful, which is the best part about it. It's I wonder how many times a guy is driving down the road, leaving a reptile show and just finished up the most recent episode of like Lost and Vanished or some awesome murder mystery, and they're like, "Man, I just bought this corn snake. I'm gonna get on my phone and search podcasts and type in reptile," and then they just start listening to a podcast. Drawing similarities to the comic world, how many people go see a comic book movie and say, well, I would love to read a comic, and go to the comic shop and buy a comic. So, comic producers, for the most part, DC and Marvel, have always worked under the idea that every comic they ever publish, doesn't matter what it is somebody's first comic.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to make every single piece of paper that you put out there accessible. That's going to be somebody's first time. Batman 658. I don't know what that is, but that is going to be Batman 658 is going to be some little Timmy or little Tommy or old Timmy or old Tommy's first comic. So it's like every episode of your show could be somebody's first window into this expansive hobby, and it's pretty neat, man.
And I know we're past 2 hours, but I don't care. I think that is actually a really good way to think about that. So if you look at, and this is for the rest of you nerds who are not nerds enough to also go to comic shops, but if you go to a comic shop or something like that, the reason that for those of you who don't know, the reason that most artists and authors for comic books or for graphic novels have to act that way is because when you are on the walls of a comic store on the shelves, you typically only have the most recent edition that facing outward, and then sometimes you can flip back a few copies and find other editions, but it usually only goes back one or two from the whatever number. If 5 is facing you, you'll probably only find 4, maybe 3 behind it. You won't find 1 and 2. And if you're in like 25 or 35, you ain't getting any more.
No. And it is not advantageous for a comic shop to have back issues. They have wasted money at that point. Yeah.
And because of that, you get the collectability, which starts to increase the price of back issues, the rarity, they're harder to find. And then that's where the whole collector, so on and so forth thing starts to come in. But that alters everything about their marketing, their actual creation, their style of creation, because then there are genres of comic, right, where the authors and artists are very consistent, and sometimes the stories are slightly repetitive, or maybe they give you of, hey, what happened last time, and that kind of thing, to keep you in the loop, in case you bought number 5 and didn't read the first 4. And then to go against the grain and be different cool kids, there are comics that don't do that. When you start reading number 5, you better have read 1 through 4, or you're not going to have a clue who Bob is and why he's important.
You have whole publishing houses that do that. Image is notorious for that. Yeah,
it's a style. It becomes competing styles of what you like, and it lends itself to like, those are the serious people, right? Like, of course I read 1 through 4. That's why I can buy number 5. And then you read Superman, so you can just buy whatever one you want and pick up the stupid story, and you get competing styles and competing ways of collecting and ways of interacting and so on and so forth. Dude, herpetoculture is so like that. Like, of course you just buy corn snakes because you can take it home and put it in any bin you want to. I only buy things from Madagascar that will die in my closet. Like,
exactly.
And there are huge facets of herpetoculture where you have to know episodes 1 through 4, or you will kill a chameleon. Then there's a facet of herpetoculture where you can just take colubrids home and put them in a box underneath your bed, and they'll be fine.
And there's also that
it lends itself to that, though.
dude, there's that same similarity to you're sitting there, you're vending your table. You've got, I've got corn snakes, and maybe I don't necessarily have corn snakes because they're easy first pets or whatever. They're easy reptiles. I have corn snakes because I really like corn snakes, and I hold back 15 of the 60 that I produce every year because I don't even want to get rid of them. But that is somebody's first animal. That is somebody's first gecko. That's somebody's first snake. You've got to be in that mentality also. There's also going to be that guy that's going to walk up to your table and look at what you have and know infinitely more than you do. It is going to happen. I've had it happen to me. Where somebody came up and was like, "Oh, said something about an animal I had," and I was like, "Yeah, it's I do this like this." And they're like, "Oh no, I know. I originally imported them in 1962 or something crazy like that." You're like, "Oh well, awesome. That's neat. That's cool for you."
I'll just stop talking now.
Come over here. Come with me into the parking lot. Let's talk for hours.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, there's
Waffle House.
Please take me to the Waffle House. Show me the Waffle House walls. I want to know what those walls have to say. I want to know everything. Yeah, it's amazing, and this generation is so, and I'm not going to say our generation. The newest generation is so good at instantaneous knowledge, at abstracting instantaneous answers that they hate doing research. They hate looking for an answer. They will not go back to that book that was wrote in 1994. I think this book is from like 1994, and look for these answers. You know what I mean? It's there. You don't have to know. Oh, I'm sorry. This is 2005. This thing's brand new. And so, yeah, but still, that's still almost a 20-year-old book, right? And it's just the thought of going back to that is insane, right? Well, I Googled this animal. It doesn't even say, I don't see any how to keep articles. So, we're done. And it's like, no, man, there was a lot of people keeping Coleonyx brevis for years. People have been doing this for 20, 30 years, 40 years probably. They were bycatch when people were looking for alterna. And people kept them successfully. And they used them as feeders. I know people that have done that. And so it's
before the internet, so they didn't have a website.
And guess what? They probably enjoyed every minute of that animal be kept. And then now, and I wanted to hit on this. I totally forgot it while we were talking about it. We can get online and order bugs delivered to our house. If you're a guy that I have a guy that breeds bugs. I'm very lucky here locally. But if you don't have a PetSmart within 100 miles or whatever, don't support them anyways. I mean, well, you can. I don't care. Do whatever you want. It's a free world, but don't. But I don't want to tell people not to do something because you do whatever you want.
Oh, that was great.
But you could get online and order a cup of 400 dubia and 30,000 mealworms and have them for 2 months or a month and a half before it's even time to start feeding, and have them bulked up with nutrition and eating the right stuff. And dude, you could do that in these plastic bins that I have just like all over my house with lids on them, right? And it's so convenient now to do everything right. Take a few steps back, find out how other people do it, add a few of our own twists on it. You want to go bioactive, try that out. It may not work, but we're not an infallible species, right? Humans are only designed to make mistakes. Be willing to fall back on what other people have done. Be willing to take the advice of the guy that's been doing it for 30 years. Don't say they're wrong, because trust me, they're not. And encompass all of it, and you'll be able to find these little geniuses like Coleonyx that will just grab your heart and give you a hug, man. They're just there. Anyways, yeah, this could be a 4-hour show. I could keep going, man. I keep going.
I love it. Okay, so to wrap things up, where can folks find you if they want to have more 4-hour conversations?
If somebody wants to reach out to me, honestly, you could reach out to me on Facebook, which is just going to be Kris Painschab. I do have a Badlands Herpetoculture Facebook page. I think I said this last time, because Facebook is so against selling animals, I kind of try to just not do it, because I'm one of those people that, like, I'd rather just not break the rules, right? Like I will if I have to get something done, but it's probably better to just follow the rules and not get in trouble. Or we're not. It's not trouble to get. Anyways, it doesn't matter. You can follow the rules of Facebook and not sell animals. Feel happy to PM me under my name, just Kris Painschab. But Instagram, I post lots of pictures of the animals that I produce. I've had a few people reach out to me and ask me if I have like availability lists or anything like that. I kind of don't. I'm lucky enough to have enough people looking for certain things that I don't necessarily have waiting lists, but I breed to what people are looking for. So if you're looking for gargoyles, leeches, Coleonyx, I will not be producing any Coleonyx this year for the rest of the year. That won't be until hopefully early next year. I will have Goniurosaurus this year. I've got a good amount of eggs incubating, lots of snakes, all kinds of North American colubrids. If you want to hit me up and just kind of ask me, hey, what do you got or what are you looking for? PM me on Instagram is like the best way to Badlands_herpetoculture is like the best. I don't, like I said, I don't have a website or anything like that. It's kind of like if you're looking for something, I'll let you know when they're available, or you want to ask questions. Oh, if people want to ask me questions, just message me and be like, I just want to talk about reptiles. And I'm going to be that guy that's going to just keep texting you back and be like, oh yeah, this, and also this, and also this. So
that is 100% true.
Yeah. Like I'm so happy to talk about reptiles. It envelops my life very much. So I have weird work schedules, so you might not hear from me for like 2 days, and then all of a sudden I'll text you for 6 days straight. But yeah, that's about it.
That is also 100% true.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay.
This is great, man. Always a blast.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I will message the Reptile Gumbo folks, and then we will try to set something up maybe in September to talk about kids. And we'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll see if I can figure something out to maybe get Indy and Walter in here, and we'll try and figure out something to do a kids episode. I think it'd be cool. Be really good.
It'd be awesome.
Okay, awesome.
All right, man.
All right, thank you.
Be good.
Later. All right. That was episode 19. Thanks for hanging out. 2.5 hours in. I love talking to Kris. Man, he was not messing around. If you message him, he would be more than happy to talk to you. I just received a few snakes from him, and we've been talking back and forth about all sorts of stuff. He's a great dude to talk to, and he just has a really cool perspective. He's a really positive dude. I love talking to him just for that. He's pretty unique, in what he keeps and how he keeps it, and his perspective on herpetoculture. I'm just really impressed with that guy. So I'm really glad that he is willing to come on and talk and just hang out with me. And I am really hopeful we can figure out the kids episode. I love that he includes his daughter. I, of course, include my kids, my wife and I both. And then I have actually talked to the Reptile Gumbo folks a few times. And so it's always fun to hear them talk about including their kids as well. So I think that could be a lot of fun. And so hopefully they have a schedule that would allow for that. And we'll try and make that happen. That's about it for me. Make sure to keep up with all the stuff for the Herpetoculture Network. The Herpetoculture Podcast now has Longleaf Reptilia back in the house. I was glad to see him, glad to hear from him. And for those that don't know, his company and logo originally was JLB Morelia for Jacob Bratz, and he changed to Longleaf Reptilia, which is pretty cool. And he messaged me when he was going to change his logo, and I thought it was pretty neat. So he's going a little bit of a different route. I think it's really cool, and I'm glad that he is back on the podcast. Another dude with a pretty cool perspective of things. It's neat to hear from him. Everybody on the Herpetoculture Network group is kind of like that, and I think that's probably why that group ended up together. And then it was pretty cool that they included me. When you hear them talk, it is very similar to Kris. When you Justin and Phil and Billy and the people that are very prevalent in the Herpetoculture Network and the Herpetoculture podcast, in the magazine, and Snakes and Stogies. There's a reason that it's a consistent group of people, and how they interact and their outlook on things, and to talk to them. It's really cool, and I'm super glad that I'm a part of it. So make sure you're keeping up with all of them, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. It will be different next time because I once again am talking to someone from overseas. So next episode will be at 2 p.m. Central Time instead of 8 p.m. Central Time. So I know that might mess things up for some folks because it'll be the middle of the day. I will be talking to Nipper Reed, and he is from the UK. He is really big on field herping. And for those of you that might remember, I made a Facebook post about my legless lizards, and I said I really needed to find somebody to talk to in regards to legless lizards. And he doesn't keep them, but he messaged me and was talking about the fact that he has seen them in the wild when field herping. And I've heard Nipper talk a multitude of times about field herping. And when he brought up the legless lizards, I was like, oh man, I have to talk to you. And so he was super cool about it and agreed. And with the time difference, it'll just be at 2 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. So for folks that like to come watch live, that will kind of adjust our schedule. But for everybody else, I will make it an episode and release it just the same as I always do. You'll be able to find it Sunday night or Monday morning. And I will see you again in 2 weeks. Later.